Thank you for choosing the multi-purpose shade structure from Yardistry. We are confident you'll find the assembly process straightforward as long as you work through each step in the assembly manual. In addition, this helpful hints video offers tips and tricks we've learned along the way for handling some of the more critical steps. Inventory. Before beginning assembly, sort your inventory by laying out each of the wood parts and hardware on the ground. Then, using the stamps or marked reference numbers, take a few minutes to cross-reference each part with the list in the assembly manual. Remember, we're always here to help. Contact us if you find a part that is damaged or missing. Take a moment to record the carton ID stamp for each box that you receive. There is a space on page 13 of your instruction manual to write down the first 5 digits that come before 14459 and also the letter at the end. Post assemblies. Start by laying a post on a solid, flat, and raised surface. At the bottom of the post, place one post mount so the short side is to the inside wall of the post. Then loosely attach with hex bolts. Next, install 2 pan screws in the lower inside holes. It's okay if these go in on an angle, then install 2 wood screws into the holes on the bottom of the post mount. Once the screws are installed, make sure to tighten the hex bolts. Repeat this step for all remaining posts. Beam assembly. To create your beam assemblies, start by laying the outside beams on a flat, raised surface, making sure laps are facing the right way. Install T-nuts as shown in your instruction manual. It's important that the T-nuts are installed on the correct side. With a helper, flip the beams over, taking care that the laps are tight. Check that the assembly is straight and properly aligned, then attach with hex bolts. Flip the assembly over again. The T-nuts should be facing up. Lay the inside beams on top of the assembly. To help ensure that all pieces are aligned correctly, insert 3/8" bolts into the holes to keep everything in place. Next, you'll want to check to make sure that the edges and the ends of the assembly are flush. If they aren't flush, loosen the bolts on the outside beam, and if needed, use a 3/8" bolt as a pry. Once everything is flush, retighten the bolt and install the wood screws. Once all of the wood screws are installed, you can remove the 3/8" guide bolts. Post to beam assembly. On a solid, flat, and if possible, raised surface, lay your posts so the notches are facing up. Install T-nuts into the middle posts only. The outside posts will be left empty. With a helper, lay the beam assembly across the posts so it fits into the notches, making sure that the bolt heads are facing up and that the holes are aligned. It's important that the beam assemblies are flush to the tops of all posts and to the ends of outside posts. Install bolts into the top holes. The bottom holes will be left empty for now. Once the bolts are installed, check that the posts are square to the beam assembly. Then tighten bolts and install the side gussets. Remember to pre-drill before installing the lag bolts. Next, pre-drill and install lag bolts into the bottom holes that were previously left empty. Truss assembly. To make your truss assembly, start by placing 2 truss halves together on a flat, raised surface, making sure that they are tight together and flush at the top. Attach the truss connector. Put the truss bracket and truss top bracket in place so the holes are aligned. You can insert hex bolts to hold them in place while the pan screws are being installed. Remove the bolts and with a helper, flip the assembly over and install hex bolts and pan screws. Frame assembly. With at least 8 helpers, stand your frame assemblies one side at a time. You'll need 6 people to lift an assembly. 2 of the people will remain in place holding the posts. Repeat to lift the other side, again leaving 2 people in place to hold the posts. With 2 helpers, Lift the truss assembly into place and attach through the top holes with hex bolts. Notice the bolt heads in the truss brackets are facing outwards. The bottom holes will be left empty at this time. When the truss assembly is in place, it should be flush to the outside and to the bottom of the beam. Check that the assembly is square and then install gussets, making sure that the laps are tight to posts and trusses. If you're assembling the 14 by 34 multi-purpose shade structure, it will require 2 additional posts. When installing these posts, it can be helpful to have a person pushing up or pulling down on the beam assembly to help get the posts into place. Make sure the posts are square to the beam assembly before installing gussets. Truss to post brackets. Truss to post brackets will need to be installed on all of the inside posts. Make sure that the brackets are tight to the posts and flush to the top. Once the hex bolt has been installed in the top hole, pre-drill and install the lag screws. Installing mid-truss. When installing the mid-trusses, you'll need 3 people and 3 ladders. Have one person in the center holding the truss assembly steady, while the 2 people at the ends of the truss assembly carefully position it into the brackets and loosely install the hex bolts. These bolts will not be tightened until later in your assembly, when the roof is installed. Once all mid-truss assemblies and gussets have been installed, move to the front and back trusses and install lag bolts into the bottom holes that were previously left empty, making sure to pre-drill. If the truss assemblies do not fit between the brackets, pull the brackets apart slightly as needed. Roof panel assembly. On a flat, solid, and raised surface, lay out the rafters for the roof frame you are building. The mid frame should look like this. The right frame should look like this. For the purposes of this video, we will be assembling the left frame. It's important to make sure the notches are facing up and that the rafter B is in the correct location. Notice that rafter Bs have 4 holes. Once the rafters are in position, place 4 straps so they fit into the cutouts in the rafters. At the bottom end of the assembly, check that the strap is not overhanging the rafter ends. Then pre-drill and attach with wood screws. Next, position a rafter top at the opposite end of the frame, making sure that the angle is correct and that it's flush to the top and sides. If the angle is not correct, flip the board over. When the rafter top is in position, attach with wood screws. Using a tape measure, check that the frame is square, then attach the remaining straps. On one side of each set of roof frames, ridges and ridge longs will need to be installed. We will be installing them on the left frame. One ridge is installed at each end of the top of the panel. Make sure the ridges are flush to the top and the outsides of the rafter top, and that bolt holes are aligned. You can insert a bolt to help keep things in place. Attach the ridges with wood screws. Repeat this process to install 2 ridge longs in the center of the rafter top, making sure they are flush and that the holes are lined. Then remove all guide bolts. For this assembly, you should have 1 left roof panel with blocks, 1 middle roof panel with blocks, and 1 right roof panel with blocks. The number of middle roof panels required will vary depending on the model you are building. Roof to beam brackets. To complete your roof assembly, you'll need to install roof to beam brackets on both left roof frame assemblies, both middle frame assemblies, and the right frame assembly without blocks. Brackets will not be installed on the right panel assembly with blocks. Note, the frame assemblies that require roof to beam brackets will vary depending on the model you are building. Refer to your instruction manual for bracket locations on your specific item. Attach a roof to beam bracket to each rafter A just tightly enough that the brackets aren't moving around. These will be fully tightened later in the assembly. Attaching roof panels. Gloves are essential for this part of the assembly because roofing materials can have sharp edges. To prevent scuffing, remove the clear and blue protective film from both sides of each aluminum part just before you use it. If you're using a power tool, take care not to over tighten the roofing screws as that can damage the roof panels. We recommend hand tightening the roofing screws until they are snug. Start by making sure your roof panel frame assembly is square and is positioned with the straps facing up. With a helper, lay the first aluminum panel down so that it's flush at the top and the sides. To ensure that the panel is placed correctly, check that the holes at the top of the panel are off the rib and the holes at the bottom are on the rib. If they aren't, turn the panel around end to end. There should be a slight overhang at the bottom of the panel. Lay the second panel down so that one rib is overlapping the first panel. Again, making sure that the top and sides are flush and that there is an overhang at the bottom. If the panels are overhanging on the top or the sides, double check to make sure that the roof panel frame is square. Once the roof panels are properly in place, attach with roofing screws, being careful to not over tighten. The bottom row should be left empty at this point. These holes will be used in a later step. Repeat steps to attach all remaining roof panels. Next, place a roof edge along the bottom of a roof panel assembly so that the holes line up with the roof panel. Be sure to pre-drill the two end holes and then attach with roofing screws, taking care not to over tighten. Then install the remaining roofing screws. Repeat for the rest of the roof panel assemblies. Peel away a small portion of the backing on a strip of weather seal, then begin attaching it to the rounded bottom of a ridge clip. Ridge clips are installed only onto the rafter bees. You can easily identify the rafter bees by locating the 4 holes in the board. Measure 2 3/4 inches up from the bottom of the rafter and make a mark. Place the ridge clip so it's flush to the top of the panel and does not overhang the roof edge. The bottom of the ridge clip should align with the mark. Take care not to push down on the ridge clip. Attach with screws, then repeat for the remaining roof panel assemblies, making sure that the right panel assembly with blocks has no brackets. Attaching roof panels to frame. Do not attempt this part of the assembly in windy conditions. You'll need 5 people and 4 ladders for this part of the assembly. Ladder placement is important for this step. We recommend having 1 ladder outside the frame, 1 ladder inside the frame, and 2 ladders in the middle. 2 people will need to lift the panel up and over the beam and pass it to the person on the inside ladder, making sure that the rafter B, which has the 4 holes, is to the inside and the rafter C is on the truss. It's important that the panel is orientated correctly and that the brackets are lifted up and over the beam to avoid any scratches or damage. Check to make sure that the corner of the roof panel is sitting flush to the FB truss and that notches in the rafter are tight to the top and outside of the beam. Bring a left panel assembly with blocks in and position onto the frame in the same manner, making sure the rafter bees in both panels are towards the middle of the unit. Loosely attach the panels together with hardware. It can help to have a person pushing up from inside the assembly to bring the panels together, and a person on the outside peak of the assembly checking that the panels are flush and aligned at the ends. Once properly in place, tighten all bolts. Install the middle panels in the same manner, checking that they are tight to the truss to post brackets left and that the bolts in the truss to post brackets left and right are loose. If the rafters aren't sitting correctly in the brackets, gently pull the brackets apart until the rafters fit. Once the middle panels are installed, bring in the left panel without blocks and lift it up over the beam, taking care not to damage or scratch it. Place the panel next to the middle roof panel that was installed previously. The rafter bees should meet. Make sure that the cutout is tight to the beam on the back of the unit, and the bolts that were previously installed in the mid-truss are still loose. Then loosely attach the rafter bees to each panel. Have a helper inside the assembly, pushing up on the roof, and a helper outside of the assembly, making adjustments to help get the panel properly aligned. If you're having difficulty getting the bolts into the roof to truss flat bracket, it may be that the rafter isn't sitting tightly on the truss. To fix this, remove the mid gusset. Then take the leg out of the truss to post brackets left and right and loosen the bolt. Once loosened, push up on the truss until it's positioned correctly and then retighten the bolt. Put the leg back in and reattach the mid gusset. Install peak cap. To install the peak cap, we recommend 5 people and 4 ladders. It's best to have 2 8-foot ladders and 2 6-foot ladders for this step. Once the first sections of the peak cap are assembled, as shown in your manual, and all ladders are in place, have a helper on the ground lift the peak cap assembly to 2 people on the 6-foot ladders. The peak cap assembly will then be passed up to the people on the 8-foot ladders. When the end section of the peak cap assembly is handed up, have a helper hold the end in place while it is being attached. To make it easier to install the peak loop, place a piece of tape over the nut. That way it doesn't fall out during installation. Install final roof panel. Now is the time to bring in the final roof panel with blocks. We recommend having an extra ladder in the center, as additional help may be needed to get the panel properly in place. Make sure the panel is in the correct position. One person on the center ladder will need to push up on the peak cap so the roof panel can slide underneath, while the second person guides the panel into position. Check to make sure the cutout in the roof panel is tight and flush to the beam. Then loosely attach the panels together and connect the rafter bees together. As with other panels, the roof may need to be pushed upwards in the center to help align the holes. Roof to beam brackets. Before attaching the roof to beam brackets, check to make sure that the cutouts in the rafters are tight to the beam. If they aren't, try adjusting the panels slightly by pushing up on them at the peak and pushing down from the outside of the roof panel. When brackets are properly in place, attach with pan screws. Once all of the brackets are installed, tighten all bolts in the roof assembly. Rafter ties. Rafter ties will need to be attached to each rafter A. If you're having trouble getting the holes to align, try loosening the peak bolts and the truss to rafter bolts, and then pushing up on the roof to reposition. Once holes are aligned, install ties and retighten the peak bolts. Ridge caps. When installing the ridge caps, slide them over the ridge clips from the bottom of the assembly and up towards the top. It's helpful to have a person pushing up on the peak cap from inside of the unit to allow the ridge caps to slide underneath. If the ridge cap doesn't slide on smoothly, add a few drops of liquid soap on the inside of the cap before reinstalling. If the ridge cap still won't go on, or an obstacle is blocking it, try bending up the side of a ridge cap. Hook one side of the ridge cap over the ridge clip, then push down on the other side until it catches. Once on the clip, bend the cap back in place under the ridge clip. Slide the ridge cap up and have someone push up on the peak cap long so the ridge cap can slide underneath it. Once the ridge caps are installed, make sure to attach peak loops on the carriage bolts on the underside of the peak cap assembly.